During the Second World War, they were called Foo Fighters, and in 1946, as they flew over Scandinavia, they were known as ghost rockets. It wasn't until Boise, Idaho businessman Kenneth Arnold saw them near Mount Rainier, Washington, that they became flying saucers. Although the official investigation wouldn't be launched for another 6 months, the Arnold sighting was the first one to receive major coverage in the United States. Army Air Force's investigations, working out of the 4th Air Force Headquarters, became deeply involved in the Arnold sighting. Arnold made his sighting of the strange objects flying one behind the other at about 9,500 feet at a speed he estimated to be more than 1,500 miles an hour. This was something that clearly wasn't made in secret projects hidden in the mountains of New Mexico, and it wasn't something that was made by the Soviet Union as they began to press for world domination. This was something strange that had no ready explanation other than it was strange and almost impossible to believe. When Arnold landed later in the afternoon on June 24th in Yakima, Washington, he told the assembled reporters what he had seen. In the course of describing the objects, he said they moved with a motion like that of saucers skipping across the water. The shape, however, according to drawings that Arnold completed for the Army, showed objects that were heel-shaped with a blunt nose. In later drawings, Arnold elaborated, showing objects that were crescent-shaped with a scalloped trailing edge and even a clear canopy over the cockpit. Later, Arnold would provide the military with a written description of the events in a document that was originally classified, but that has long since been released. Arnold wrote,
"On June 24th, I had finished my work, and about 2 o'clock I took off for Chehalis, Washington Airport with the intention of going to Yakima, Washington. I flew directly toward Mount Rainier after reaching an altitude of about 9,500 feet, which is the approximate elevation of the high plateau from which Mount Rainier rises. There was a DC-4 to the left and to the rear of me, approximately 15 miles distance, and I should judge a 14,000-foot elevation. I hadn't flown more than 2 or 3 minutes on my course when a bright flash reflected on my airplane. It startled me, as I thought I was too close to some other aircraft. I looked every place in the sky and couldn't find where the reflection had come from until I looked to the left and the north of Mount Rainier, where I observed a chain of 9 peculiar-looking aircraft flying from north to the south at approximately 9,500-foot elevation and going, seemingly, in a definite direction of about 170 degrees. The objects, were approaching Mount Rainier very rapidly, and I merely assumed they were jet planes. Anyhow, I discovered that this was where the reflection had come from, as 2 or 3 of them every few seconds would dip or change their course slightly, just enough for the sun to strike them at an angle that reflected brightly on my plane. I thought it was very peculiar that I couldn't their tails, but assumed they were some type of jet plane. I was determined to clock their speed, as I had 2 definite points I could clock them by. I watched these objects with great interest, as I had never before observed airplanes flying so close to the mountain tops. I would estimate their elevation could have varied 1,000 feet one way or another, up or down. They flew like many times I have observed geese to fly in a rather diagonal chain-like line, as if they were linked together. Their speed at the time did not impress me particularly, because I knew that our Army and Air Forces had planes that went very fast. A number of newsmen and experts suggested that I might have been seeing reflections, or even a mirage. This I know to be absolutely false, as I observed these objects not only through the glass of my airplane, but turned my airplane sideways where I could open my window and observe them with a completely unobstructed view. When these objects were flying approximately straight and level, there were just a black, thin line, and when they flipped was the only time I could get a judgment as to their size.
Arnold's sightings didn't gain front-page status immediately. Stories about it appeared in newspapers a day or two later, usually on page 8 or 9. and then with a comment about strange objects in fast flight. It was, at that time, the story of an oddity. Arnold claimed later that he thought he had seen some sort of new jet aircraft, and he was a little concerned about breaking the security around it. First Lieutenant Felix Eugene Moncla Jr., presumed dead, was a United States Air Force pilot who disappeared while performing an air defense intercept over Lake Superior in 1953. This is sometimes known as the Kinross Incident, after Kinross Air Force Base, where Moncla was on temporary assignment when he disappeared chasing a UFO radar blip. On the evening of November 23, 1953, Air Defense Command Ground Intercept Radar in Michigan identified an unusual target near the Sioux Locks, designated a UFO. An F-89C Scorpion jet from Kinross Air Force Base was scrambled to investigate the radar return. The Scorpion was piloted by First Lieutenant Moncla, with Second Lieutenant Robert L. Wilson acting as the Scorpion's radar operator. Wilson had a difficult time tracking the object on the Scorpion's radar, so ground radar operators gave Moncla directions towards the objects as he flew. Moncla eventually closed in on the object at about 8,000 feet in altitude. Ground control tracked the Scorpion and the unidentified object as two blips on the radar screen. The two blips on the radar screen grew closer and closer until they seemed to merge. Assuming that Moncla had flown either under or over the target, ground control anticipated that moments later the Scorpion and the object would again appear as two separate blips. Donald Kehoe reported that there was a fear that the two objects had struck one another, but the single blip continued on its previous course. Attempts were made to contact Moncla via radio, but without success. A search and rescue operation by both the United States Air Force and the RCAF was quickly mounted, but failed to find a trace of the plane or the pilots. Weather conditions were a factor in hampering the search. To this day, Moncla is presumed dead, and his aircraft was never recovered. Did First Lieutenant Felix Eugene Moncla Jr. encounter a UFO? Was he taken by the occupants of the UFO? No one knows, and this one remains a mystery in the annals of top UFO encounters.
Like that, 15 miles in a fraction of a second. I disengaged the autopilot to push the nose over because we were at a collision course. And when I did, I just saw it head on. It's 300 feet in diameter. We knew that. We had a knowing, like somebody was telling us, 300 feet in diameter. So at that time, I heard a hell of a noise. And I said to the friend, what the hell was that? He said, well, the navigator and the radio man ducking fell, hit their head, one hit their head, hurt their arm, they were scrambling on the deck. So I thought it hit us underneath. So I said, well, where in the hell did it go? And Fred said, it's right over to the right. I can see it. I couldn't see it. So it drifted forward about 5 miles from it. It never got to the altitude that we were at, a few hundred feet below. I began to watch it. Well, we knew then it was a friendly encounter. They just wanted us to see him. So then I went to engage the autopilot again. The magnetic compass was going like this. And the bird dogs, which is direction finders, two bird dogs, they were pointing right at this thing, just vibrating like this. And there was a lot of electrical things in the airplane that went haywire. So I told Fred, did you see that coming? He says, anyway, it was close, it was doing this. And so I went back to the vacuum operator. That's the old airplane, that vacuum operator, hydraulic operator control, so I go back to that. So then we sat there and watched it for a while, because it just paced us, stayed with us. And so the other crew, when they landed large engines, so they had to send back, they came forward. Al Jones, which was the original plane commander, took my seat. And it was still there, he was watching it. And as I was walking back aft, he decided he was gonna chase it. And so he disengaged off. When I get back aft, I wanted to see how the passengers were doing. They're all on the right-hand side. They could see it underneath the wing. And then, oh hell, I recognized the doctor back. He was a psychiatrist out of Bethesda Naval Hospital, plus a lot of other things. So I said, I better talk to him first. So Cornell said, did you see what we saw, Doc? He grinned at me and looked me straight in the eye. Yeah, and he says, yeah, that was a flying saucer. I didn't look at it. I don't believe in such things.
On November 23, 2019, a UFO was captured on video in Tucson, Arizona. The remarkable 40-minute video was released by the Department of Homeland Security and was recorded by a DHS spy plane equipped with FLIR optical technology. The spy plane's purpose was to discover drug smugglers over the Arizona regions. 20 minutes into the flight, the UFO was spotted and tracked for a full 40 minutes. The footage was examined by the UFO AC Research Group, and it was determined that the unusual aircraft was unnatural and unidentifiable. The DHS launched their own investigation and to this day have not produced an explanation. The speed of the craft was estimated to be 90 to 200 miles an hour, and it would make abrupt turns and variations in flight, even rotating at certain times. The length was determined to be 5 to 6 feet long, and a smaller ball-shaped craft flying with it at close proximity was captured in the footage. Most importantly, the craft did not appear to emanate heat or any form of energy. On February 21st, 2021, on American Airlines Flight 2292, flying between Cincinnati and Phoenix, the pilots experienced a frightening close encounter with what its crew described as a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile, maneuvering extremely fast over the aircraft at 36,000 feet. A seasoned radio interceptor heard the frantic transmissions from the airline pilot through his scanners, who documented the encounter at approximately 1:19 Central Standard Time. The pilot reported, "Do you have any targets up here? We just had something go right over the top of us. I hate to say this, but it looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing, moving really fast right over the top of us." The response was chilling. There were no significant military aircraft present, and nothing was detected on radar. The aircraft flew on to land safely in Phoenix. This incident was similar to an encounter that occurred in the same area 3 years prior, when a Learjet and an airliner both had close encounters with unidentified objects. No investigation followed on either event, and they remain a mystery to this day.
In March of 1971, the USS Trepang, a submarine under the command of Rear Admiral Dean Reynolds Sackett, was on its journey between Iceland and Norway's Jan Mayen Island in the Atlantic Ocean. While testing its weapons under the ice caps, the submarine came upon an unidentified flying object by accident. Alarmed by what they were seeing, photographs of not one, but several crafts were taken. These photographs have remained top secret, but were leaked to a French paranormal magazine by an anonymous source. Experts who have analyzed the photos have declared them credible.
3 U.S. Army veterans have withheld their unusual encounter that occurred in 2014 that was ultimately suppressed by their commanding officers. Years later, in light of the Pentagon hearings, the veterans felt comfortable to come forth with what they witnessed. Stationed in the Sinai Desert on the Israel border, they were notified of mysterious aerial objects. Upon investigating, the 3 witnessed bright, spinning crafts, also seen by another outpost 200 miles away. One of the veterans described it as a big object with several smaller objects which appeared to be communicating or scuffling like a dogfight in the air. We knew it wasn't our military, and it was baffling. To this day, I've never seen anything like the craft, covering such distance with extreme speeds. The crafts were observed with night vision goggles, and it was determined that the biggest one was ovular, the size of a jumbo jet flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet, at an estimated several thousand miles per hour. The smaller crafts darted around the large craft like fireflies, left, right, up and down, making instantaneous high-speed turns. Eventually, the smaller crafts merged with the larger one, and it disappeared. The Egyptian and Israeli militaries were consulted to confirm if they could identify what these objects were, but couldn't explain the sighting. The veterans were trained observers, familiar with all types of aircraft, and they were unable to report what they witnessed because they couldn't determine what they were. One of the veterans was reprimanded by his superior officer for discussing the encounter and received numerous violations as an effort to get him fired over allegations that he had mental issues. The other 2 veterans were equally persecuted and betrayed by senior Pentagon officials, ironically on the same day that the Pentagon held the congressional UFO hearings.
Some of the most compelling evidence that UFOs are real and originate from somewhere else comes from encounters involving the military itself. One such encounter involved the USS FDR crewman Chester Brzezinski, who described what occurred in the year 1958. He stated that he was on a shakedown cruise when a small light appeared in the sky that began following the ship. The mysterious white ball of light accelerated and came so close in range that Brzezinski could make out figures inside the craft. His impression was that these beings were not human. He described the size of the craft as 75 to 100 feet long, and at times would change colors. A strong heat wave emanated from the craft. He recalls feeling the heat on his face as he gazed upon the silhouettes of the occupants looking at them. Then, all at once, the base of the craft turned cherry red, and the object vanished from sight in a flash. The crew members were stunned, and soon after were abruptly transferred. A CIA investigation ensued, but as Brzezinski later stated, thus began a massive cover-up. There is no official record of this incident ever happening.
On September 19th of 1973, this famous UFO case occurred. After midnight above Tehran, Iran, two successive F-4 interceptors attempted to catch a radar visual UFO that had been widely reported by civilians. Each time visual contact was made, the crew attempted to arm a missile and prepare to fire it. However, the weapon system's electronics failed on board the aircraft. Another famous case occurred the next day, October 18, 1973, over Mansfield, Ohio at 11:05 p.m. Captain Lawrence J. Cohn, aboard an Army Reserve helicopter, encountered a domed craft-like object that beamed green light into the cockpit and lifted the helicopter off course. The Army helicopter was returning from Columbus, Ohio to Cleveland, Ohio, and southeast of Mansfield Airport, while flying at an altitude of 2,500 feet. On board, SSG Yancek observed a red light on the east horizon, 90 degrees to the flight path of the helicopter. Approximately 30 seconds later, Yancek indicated the object was converging on the helicopter at the same altitude and at an airspeed in excess of 600 knots towards a mid-air collision. Cohn observed the converging object, took over the controls of the aircraft, and initiated a powered descent from 2,500 feet to 1,700 feet to avoid any impact. All radios went dead. The crew expected impact, but instead, the object hesitated momentarily over the helicopter, then slowly continued on a westerly direction, accelerating due west of Mansfield Airport, then turning 45 degrees to the northwest. Captain Cohn indicated the altimeter read a 100 feet per second climb and read 3,500 feet with the collective in the full down position. Cohn returned the aircraft to 2,500 feet and flew back to Cleveland, Ohio. The flight plan was closed, and the FAA Flight Service Station was notified of the incident. The radio returned to normal 10 minutes after the incident. Some witnesses on the ground reported seeing the helicopter as well as an object like a blimp and as big as a school bus hovering above the helicopter. The object was cigar-shaped, metallic gray with a dome on top. It was about 60 feet long, without any portholes or intake openings that could be seen. It was displaying a red light in the nose, a green spotlight at the back, which swept around and shone into the cabin. It was described from the ground by witnesses like rays coming down, and the helicopter, the trees, the road, and everything turned green. February 2nd, 1973, in Auckland, New Zealand, at about 2 a.m., an intense blue-white light paced a Grand Commander aircraft for 20 to 25 seconds. The navigation instruments malfunctioned. Captain Peter Telling, flying the aircraft at an altitude of 10,000 feet over the Uhura Beacon area, thought he had a fire in his starboard engine. About 30 yards from the aircraft was a ball of intense bluish-white light, like a welding arc that was 20 feet in diameter, and stayed with his aircraft for several seconds. All of his instruments rotated wildly during the encounter.
A stunning case, recently declassified, took place in 1992 on an Australian destroyer returning home from an Asian deployment at 2 a.m. on a clear night on the bridge of the destroyer. A Navy serviceman and 4 other colleagues on night watch duty witnessed an unusual cylindrical object hovering over the ship's bridge wing. A sonar technician who would later qualify to become one of the elites of the Australian Navy's Special Forces stated, "I looked up, and there was this long cylindrical silver object, about 20 meters long, with a heat haze around it. It was following us no more than 500 meters away. We could see it very clearly in the night sky. I called out to the officer of the watch. and 5 of us all looked up at this thing for at least a good minute. Then, it instantly accelerated and then disappeared into the distance. The acceleration was amazing. Instantaneous. It just disappeared in the blink of an eye. 30 years later, he remains adamant that what he witnessed could not have been a conventional aircraft, balloon, or drone. To this day, he has no explanation for what he and his colleagues saw. Due to the stigma at the time of reporting UFO incidents, he remained silent until now.
In July 1973, in the town of Kokadido, Japan, witnesses saw a light descend to about 75 feet above the surface of the local bay. A tube then began pulling water up into it. The witness described it as smooth and round as a ping pong ball, with small windows around the center of the object. He saw 2 eerie shadow-like figures, which he said were too small and deformed to be called the shadows of men. On July 16th, in Palamo, Spain, at 6:30 p.m., Miguel Ramiro Fernandez de Cordoba was flying a forced-fire aircraft with a clear sky and good visibility. Suddenly, he saw a strange object which looked like a rugby ball cut in half. The object paced and maintained the same position on the right of the aircraft for 10 to 12 minutes. The aircraft radio system failed during the sighting.
U.S. Air Force Captain Robert Salas relates his UFO incident. My security guard says, "Sir, there's a glowing red object hovering right outside the front gate. I'm looking at it right now. I've got all the men out here with their weapons drawn." The nuclear-tipped warheads went into a no-go condition, meaning they could not be launched. We lost anywhere between 16 to 18 ICBMs. At the same time, UFOs were in the area and were observed by airmen. Bob Kaminsky headed up the organization to look at all aspects of these shutdowns. He was told by his boss that the Air Force said, "Stop the investigation. Do no more on this and do not write a final report." This is very unusual, especially in light of the fact that headquarters was stating this was of extreme importance.
The Carson Sink case was a famous UFO incident that occurred over the Carson Sink in western Nevada in the United States on July 24, 1952. The 2 pilots who witnessed the incident were Lieutenant Colonel John L. McGinn and Lieutenant Colonel John R. Barton, both veteran flyers with distinguished military careers. The UFOs were bright silver in color with a delta wing airfoil, but without tails or flight canopies, which every known aircraft possessed.
U.S. Air Force Security Officer Larry Warren revealed an unsettling incident. They said, "We are going to show you a film that might help you put in perspective what you gentlemen have witnessed." They ran the film. The best clip on it showed the berets of the 5th Special Forces in Vietnam with low scrub brush and a guy with a camera. He turns the camera and this giant green thing rises out of the brush very slowly and deliberately, below where they are, up to face level. Shrubbery and brush is falling off this massive thing. I'll never forget that in my life. The only reason I have my records is because I was advised to steal some of them by an Air Force colonel, because he said they would vaporize me.
On January 7, 1948, 25-year-old Captain Thomas F. Mantell, a Kentucky Air National Guard pilot, died in the crash of his P-51 Mustang fighter after being sent in pursuit of an unidentified flying object. The event was among the most publicized early UFO incidents. Later investigation by the United States Air Force Project Blue Book indicated that Mantell may have died chasing a skyhook balloon, which in 1948 was a top-secret project that Mantell would not have known about. Mantell pursued the object in a steep climb and disregarded suggestions to level his altitude. At high altitude, he blacked out from a lack of oxygen. His plane went into a downward spiral and crashed. In 1956, Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppel, the first head of the Project Blue Book, wrote that the Mantell crash was one of 3 classic UFO cases in 1948 that would help to define the UFO phenomenon in the public mind and would help convince some Air Force intelligence specialists that UFOs were a real physical phenomenon. The other 2 classic sightings in 1948 were the Charles Whitted UFO encounter and the Gorman dogfight. Historian David M. Jacobs argues the Mantell case marked a sharp shift in both public and governmental perceptions of UFOs. Previously, the news media often treated UFO reports with a whimsical or glib attitude reserved for silly season news. Following Mantell's death, however, Jacobs notes, the fact that a person had died in an encounter with an alleged flying saucer dramatically increased public concern about the phenomenon. Now, a dramatic new prospect entered throughout the UFO community. They may not be only extraterrestrial, but potentially hostile as well. The Cash Landrum incident was a reported unidentified flying object sighting in 1980, which the witnesses insist was responsible for damage to their health. It is one of the very few UFO cases to result in criminal court proceedings. The Rendlesham Forest incident is the name given to a series of reported sightings of unexplained lights and the alleged landing of an extraterrestrial spacecraft in the Rendlesham Forest, Suffolk, England in late December 1980. It is perhaps the most famous UFO event to have happened in Britain, ranking amongst the best-known UFO events worldwide.
Watch, straight ahead off my flash back there. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. So, can I get some? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. You'll see out maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out.
Cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kovalyuk, when speaking about the Soyuz 6th mission in 1981, said, "Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years I have never spoken on such things. At that time we were over the area of South Africa, moving towards the area of the Indian Ocean. I was just made some gymnastic exercises when I saw in front of me, through a porthole, an object which I could not explain. It is impossible to determine distances in space. A small object can appear large and far away, and the other way round. Sometimes a cloud of dust appears like a large object. Anyway, I saw this object, and then something happened I could not explain. Something impossible according to the laws of physics. The object had this shape, elliptical, and flew with us. From a frontal view, it looked like it would rotate in flight to direction. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened. Very beautiful to watch, a golden light. This was the first part. Then 1 or 2 seconds later, a second explosion followed somewhere else, and 2 spheres appeared, golden and very beautiful. After this explosion, I saw white smoke, then a cloud-like sphere. Before we entered the darkness, we flew through this terminator, the twilight zone between day and night. We flew eastwards, and when we entered the darkness of the Earth's shadow, I could not see them any longer. The two spheres never returned. It appears that the Russians don't silence their cosmonauts half as much as the Americans. Here's another cosmonaut, Musa Manarov of the Mir mission in 1991. It happened during a visit mission, when all our attention was focused on the slowly approaching space capsule. I was close to the great porthole, from where I could see our approaching visitors. I watched everything very carefully. When the capsule came closer, I filmed it with a professional Betacam camera. Suddenly, I noticed something below the spaceship, which first I looked like an antenna. Only when I looked closer and analysed the situation, I realised that there was no antenna at all. But first I thought it was part of the construction. But then this element started to move. It moved away from the ship. So I grabbed the radio and told them, "Hey boys, you are losing something." This of course alarmed them. With all my experience, especially with docking manoeuvres in space, I can tell you that especially in this phase, simply nothing can break off at all. If something would have been lost, it would have been torn off long before, during the launch, the manoeuvres, the turn, all these much more energetic flight phases. Now we were just gliding slowly towards each other without any pressure on the capsule. But then this something started to move downwards. When it flew away, it attracted all our attention. It looked like it was rotating. It was difficult to estimate its dimensions. If it was close or far away, I could not say. It was in free sight, and in space, it is difficult to estimate any size and distance. I can only say for sure that it was not very close, since I set the camera for infinity. If it would have been just a screw or something close to us, it would have been out of focus. The object was quite far away. In any case, at least 300 feet, since this was the distance of the space capsule, and I had the impression that it was beyond it. It is possible that it was a kind of UFO. We can't say with any certainty what it was. It was definitely not a bigger piece of space junk, no rocket or part of so, since this would have been located. The space surveillance, ours and the American, locate all bigger objects in space. They are followed. For every minute we know their position and their flight direction. If such an object would have come so close to the Mir, they would have located it and informed us. I don't think it was a piece of space junk or debris. There is a lot of that in the Earth orbit, satellite parts, rocket parts, just everything. But our space surveillance locates them, and according to them, there was nothing.
Joseph A. Walker was sent on direct missions to detect and photograph UFOs. At least, this is what Walker claimed himself. He was an American World War II pilot, experimental physicist, NASA test pilot, and astronaut, and was one of 12 pilots who flew the North American X-15, an experimental space plane jointly operated by the Air Force and NASA.
The X-15 is cut loose 7 miles over the Mojave Desert to fall free and glide back to Earth, testing the stability of the most radically different aerodynamic structure ever engineered.
In 1963, Walker made 3 flights above 50 miles, therefore qualifying as an astronaut according to the United States definition of the boundary of space. The latter 2, X-15 flights 90 and 91, also surpassed the Kármán line, the internationally accepted boundary of 100 kilometers. Making the latter flights immediately after the completion of the Mercury and Vostok programs, Walker became the first person to fly to space twice. He was the only X-15 pilot to fly above 100 kilometers during the program. He is credited with filming not less than 5 sightings during one of his missions. None of the films have ever been released to the public. Walker was killed on June 8, 1966, when his F-104N starfighter chase aircraft collided with a North American XB-70 Valkyrie. At an altitude of about 25,000 feet, Walker's starfighter was one of 5 aircraft in a tight formation for a General Electric publicity photo when his F-104 drifted into contact with the XB-70's right wingtip. The plane flipped over, passed over the top of the XB-70, striking both its vertical stabilizers and its left wing in the process, and exploded, killing Walker. The Valkyrie entered an uncontrollable spin and crashed into the ground north of Barstow, California, killing co-pilot Carl Cross. Its pilot, Alvin White, one of Walker's colleagues from the Man in Space Soonest program, ejected and was the sole survivor. The USAF summary report of the accident investigation stated that, given the position of the F-104 relative to the XB-70, the F-104 pilot would not have been able to see the XB-70's wing, except by uncomfortably looking back over his left shoulder. The report stated that it was likely that Walker, piloting the F-104, maintained his position by looking at the fuselage of the XB-70 forward of his position. The unlikeliness of a test pilot and astronaut with such a long career making a mistake like this was not considered by the accident investigators.
There is a man who worked for NASA as a spacecraft operator at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. He was involved in over 650 missions, including the Mercury and Apollo expeditions and the Space Shuttle period. His name is Clark McClelland, and it was during this time on the Space Shuttle mission that he witnessed something very strange. According to McClelland, he was monitoring the mission from his desk at the Kennedy Launch Control Center when he saw something. Here's his statement. I, Clark C. McClelland, former spacecraft operator, Space Shuttle Fleet, personally observed an 8 to 9 foot tall ET on 27-inch video monitors while on duty in the Space Kennedy Center, Launch Control Center. The ET was standing upright in the Space Shuttle payload bay, having a discussion with 2 tethered US NASA astronauts. I also observed on my monitors the spacecraft of the ET, as it was in a stabilized, safe orbit to the rear of the Space Shuttle main engine pods. I observed this incident for about 1 minute and 7 seconds. Plenty of time to memorize all that I was observing. It was an ET and alien starship. Could he have been mistaken, seeing something different, and his mind filled in the gaps? He points out that in many years he was working on these things, he had strong visual recognition of crafts created and flown by the human race, whether secret or otherwise. He claims that he was not the only witness and that colleagues secretly confided that they too had witnessed the alien. Surely the man is making it all up and never worked at NASA. The fact is, he did. There is photographic evidence, and NASA have never denied his employment. He has also pointed a finger strongly at NASA for being a military establishment. Here's what he said. The Pentagon owns NASA. Some of the Department of Defense missions I participated in were top secret. Those missions carried TS satellites and other space mission hardware into orbit, where several crews met with ETs. He claims that the US government has been keeping a secret a long-standing military alliance with aliens for decades, in league with the Human Exchange Program. A close friend of McClelland is the astronaut Edgar Mitchell. He has openly stated his belief in aliens visiting Earth. Mitchell stated that he was 90% sure that many of the thousands of UFOs recorded since the 1940s belongs to visitors from other planets.
Mysterious lights emanating from what appear to be spacecrafts jettison out of the Earth's atmosphere. Just as the objects come into focus, NASA's live video feed from the International Space Station is abruptly cut off. A growing pattern has emerged over the years. Continual incidents of alien crafts caught on camera hovering over the Earth's atmosphere, or in some cases, departing Earth on course to deep space. Videos of these incidents shared on YouTube have received millions of views and created a public awareness of a deliberate conspiracy to cloak the truth by NASA. One avid observer of the video feeds stated that UFOs do appear regularly, and like clockwork, NASA cuts the feed when the UFO gets close to the station. July 2016, a mysterious object appeared moving towards the International Space Station. A viewer of the live feed stated that it was diamond-shaped. As the object neared the station, the transmission was suddenly terminated. January 2017, an observer was viewing the live feed when suddenly the feed cut out. Seconds later it came back on and a mysterious object appeared. He stated that at first it was small, then grew bigger, lasting 25 seconds. He commented that it must have been an alien craft due to its odd maneuvers and altitude. Defense Intelligence Agency analyst John Maynard recounted this exchange. I said, "Now this is supposed to be a system that tracks radar anomalies on Earth, right?" He says, "Yep, that's what it does." So I ask, then why are half of them pointed towards outer space? Towards the moon? Towards areas that are just blank space? What are they looking for? He says, "You've got to have a need to know to get an answer." We go back to a comment made by one of the astronauts when he stepped on the moon. It was the day after they got there, and he says, "You're right. They're already here." It went out on the airwaves. I know several people who recorded it. It was quickly taken out of all the tapes that were publicly broadcast. NASA Department of Energy Harland Bentley revealed this. "I was in a facility in California doing classified work. Our astronauts were doing a loop around the moon. I heard them say they had a bogey coming in at 11 o'clock. It was another type of ship. There were portals there that they could see in. They could see beings of some sort. They just took photographs. After a few thousand miles, they took off from the capsule and went away. March 2019. During a routine maneuver of a mini shuttle on the exterior of the ISS, a strange light appeared in the distance. The light gradually got closer to the orbiting laboratory. A viewer who witnessed the craft stated that he saw the object further away a few hours earlier. Gradually, the object moved closer, about 30 to 50 meters away from the station. He described the anomaly as massive in size and partially cloaked. But soon it was revealed by sunlight bouncing off it. He added that when the shape came into focus, it appeared to be a thick, round cylinder with a complex texture. Suddenly, the live feed was terminated.
In the early 1950s, astronaut Gordon Cooper was assigned to a jet fighter group in Germany. While stationed there, he remembers very vividly the weak and entire formation of circular objects passed over the airbase on an almost daily routine. But that's not all. While a project manager at Edwards Air Force Base, just 3 years before entering America's space program, Cooper had assigned a team of photographers to an area of the vast dry lake beds near Edwards. The former astronaut disclosed that while the crew was deployed, they spotted a strange-looking craft above the lake bed, and they began filming it. Cooper says the object was very definitely hovering above the ground, and then it slowly came down and sat on the lake bed for a few minutes. During this time, the motion picture cameras were filming. There were varied estimates by the cameraman on what the actual size of the object was, but they all agreed that it was at least the size of a vehicle that would carry normal-sized people in it. Colonel Cooper was not fortunate enough to be outside at the time of this incredible encounter, but he did see the films as soon as they were rushed through the development process. It was a typical circular-shaped UFO, he recalls. Not too many people saw it because it took off at quite a sharp angle and just climbed straight on out of sight. Where are these films today? Why would Gordon Cooper, a respected and honorable American hero, make up such a story? According to him, UFOs were seen regularly at Edwards Air Force Base. Worldwide during 1973, UFOs were also being reported. Spain experienced a major flap along with Brazil, Belgium, and Australia. And on September the 20th of 73, the 59th day of flight of Skylab 3, astronauts witnessed and photographed a strange red object. Not more than 30 to 50 nautical miles from them, Alan Bean, Owen Garrett, and Jack Lossman reported the object was brighter than any of the planets.